Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 2 of Chilled and Killed, a true crime podcast where we discuss a crime over a glass of wine or two. We're your hosts, Sam
and Amanda.
And this week we are discussing a teenage boy who never made his full trip back home from college.
For this week's wine, we chose Borrasca Brut Rosé. We thought pouring champagne would be the best way to ring in 2020, so here we go.
Here we go for sure. So this is a champagne, or how we like to call it, champagne.
Is it good?
I like it.
The bubbles went straight up my nose. This is not the right glass for this.
There are so many bubbles. It's
and
ridiculous.
I don't have champagne flutes, so I've got wine glasses. These are red wine glasses.
Yeah, they are. It's a terrible glass for champagne.
Whoops, it ain't.
It's good though. I like it. It's bubbly. It's fresh.
It's light.
Fruity.
I feel like it's light.
It is. It's not like too. Sometimes like champagnes are pretty dry.
Yeah.
Can I just also mention that she took a sip of her like already half full red wine glass and poured in like probably at least 3 more ounces. Now she's got like 3/4 a cup full.
Sorry, not sorry. I liked it.
Clearly. The bottle is already half empty and we have only been in
business for 30 seconds here.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the notes about this champagne. It's a Spanish champagne, which just means that it's not champagne. Right?
Because so.
The back of the bottle, it says sparkling wine, so it's not champagne. Whatever.
Felt like a champagne with the pop and all.
Well, champagne just means it's from Champagne. It's still just sparkling wine, so that's what we got. So, the back of the bottle says, a pale rose color, vibrant red fruits with hints of flowers, on the mouth that is full of red berries, and very fresh thanks to its fine bubbles. A long finish and perfect balance between fresh fruit and acidity. It pairs well with appetizers, salads, and cheeses.
Let me tell you, there are mega bubbles in here.
Yes, it's quite bubbly. Another thing to add is this bottle was only $9.98. All right, so should we get into it?
I think so.
All right. Well, this week we want to introduce you to a very interesting case which contains an extremely detailed timeline of events. This case is about a young man named Bryce Laspisa. He was born April 30th, 1994, and he grew up with his parents, Karen and Mike Laspisa, in Naperville, Illinois. He went to school at Naperville Central High School, where he had a lot of friends, and one could say that he was a social butterfly. He was always inviting his friends over to hang out at his parents' house, and he was described as a fun and funny person to be around. In 2012, after he graduated from high school, his parents decided to move to Laguna Niguel, California, which is about 2,000 miles away from their original home in Illinois. At the same time, Bryce had moved to Chico, California, to attend Sierra College in Rocklin, California, which was about a 530-mile north from his parents' new home, which was about a solid 8-hour drive via I-5, but it's also about an hour and a half north from his school. Bryce was enrolled in industrial and graphic design courses at Sierra College. He was a very talented artist and focused on drawing and woodworking. During his freshman year, he met his girlfriend, Kim Sly, and from the outside they had a very respectful relationship. Summer break had recently ended, and Bryce returned to school ready to start his 2013 sophomore year. During the school year, Bryce would often call his parents and keep them updated on events in his life. On Monday, August 26th, Bryce reportedly had a great first day of classes, just a very normal day, and even had a typical conversation during the evening, updating his mother on his life events and how school was going so far.
Now, this is where the story really starts to take a turn. And a quick forewarning for all of you. A lot of dates and times are about to get thrown into the picture, so either try and pay really close attention, or if you need to, feel free to rewind and re-listen for the story to make the most sense to you. Wednesday, August 28th, is where interactions with Bryce started to become a little strange. His roommate Sean noticed a shift in his behavior and personality and decided to call Bryce's mom. He called his mom to report his odd behavior, which was noticing that Bryce had been drinking pretty heavily. In fact, most weekends he would often drink an entire bottle of hard liquor to himself. He also started taking non-prescribed medication called Vyvanse, which is normally an ADHD prescribed medication, which is used to increase focus. Bryce's intent, however, was to stay awake all night to finish playing video games. Also, while on the phone with Karen, Sean told her that Bryce had randomly broken up with his girlfriend, Kim, through a simple text, which didn't seem like something that he would normally do. Bryce had also started giving away some of his important possessions, such as his Xbox, which, if you think back to it, he just took prescription medications or non-prescribed medications to stay up and play on it all night, so that is pretty important to him. And then also, he gave away some diamond earrings that his mother had passed down to him. Just so you guys know, here's a quick side note. If a non-prescribed dose of Vyvanse is taken, it can actually have a similar effects that methamphetamines has on the body, in that it creates a false sense of energy and well-being, increased aggression and irritability, disturbed sleep patterns, panic, increased heart rate, blood pressure, and so much more.
Which is really interesting, and keep that in mind as we go along.
Yeah.
So now we're going to focus a little bit more on the timeline. So continuing still with Wednesday the 28th, it's now 10 o'clock that night, and Bryce shows up to Kim's apartment in Chico. He appeared unnerved, and he told her that he wanted to break up. He had already texted her this, but he went to her in person as well. And Kim started getting really concerned with his behavior, and actually took his keys to prevent him from driving away, but this only escalated his anger, leading him to call his mom and asked her to intervene. Karen stated that Bryce sounded fine while talking on the phone. There was nothing out of the ordinary that made her or Bryce's father, Mike, feel concerned for their son's safety. He didn't sound upset or under the influence of anything to them. Karen wanted Bryce to put Kim back on the phone again so she could explain that it was okay to give Bryce his keys back. However, Kim tried to explain that Bryce was still not acting himself, and she was genuinely concerned that he would drive back home and get injured, or worse. But Bryce was persistent, and he kept telling his mom that he was okay. At one point during the conversation, Karen even offered to fly up to Bryce the next day to make sure that he was really okay, but he told her not to do that and again said that he was fine. He did, however, say that there was something he wanted to talk to her about, but that he would discuss it with her later. Bryce hadn't been at school for more than 2 weeks, so it hadn't been long since she last saw him, and Karen wasn't sure what he could possibly have to talk to her about, but nonetheless, Karen, back on the phone with Kim now, told her to hand the keys back over and let Bryce drive home, with the understanding that Bryce would call her as soon as he made it home. So, at 11:30 p.m., Bryce left Kim's house.
And now it's 1 a.m. on Thursday, August 29th. Bryce did, in fact, call his mom back, and she knew that because she missed a call. She later assumed that when she saw it in the morning, it was probably just Bryce simply calling her back to say that he made it home safely. So at this point, she wasn't worried at all. What she didn't know was, Bryce didn't make it back home. Little did anyone know, actually, that Bryce started traveling further down south, away from his apartment in Rockland College, and was actually heading towards the Tehachapi Mountains. This information was picked up from the nearby cell towers, which was pinged during his 1 a.m. phone call to his mother. Okay, so 1 o'clock is when we know his last whereabouts. Now fast forward a little bit. It's 11 a.m., still on that same Thursday the 29th afternoon, and Mike and Karen got a voicemail alert from their auto insurance company stating that roadside assistance service call had been made to the car that Bryce was actually driving. At this point, Karen started to get a little concerned and decided to call Sean, Bryce's roommate, to ask if Bryce was still sleeping. Sean informed her that Bryson actually never came home that night. Karen's concerns were starting to rise, so she started searching for more information. She checked their credit card accounts to see if there were any recent charges that might give a location to go off of. She saw one charge in Buttonville, California, which is about a 5-hour drive south from Chico, and is a town really only known for its truck stops. This town is about a 3-hour drive to Laguna Niguel, so Karen just assumed Bryce might have been on his way home. Upon further investigation, Mike and Karen saw the charge was at a repair shop called Castro Truck and Tire, and it was a $20 charge for gas.
They decided to call the shop, and a man named Christian spoke to them and told them that he had been called earlier around 9 a.m. to deliver 3 gallons of gas to Bryce, who had run out while at the Button Willow rest stop. Christian noticed that Karen sounded concerned, and he offered to go back to the location and check on Bryce in about 15 minutes. Christian arrived at the same location that he was at just 3 hours earlier to find Bryce still sitting there in his car. Christian called Karen and handed the phone to Bryce to talk to her. She asked him what he was doing, and his reply was, "Nothing," which is truly the understatement of the year, honestly.
You can say that again.
So Karen just urged Bryce to get gas and continue driving home. So he did. Bryce went to the gas station, he filled up his car, and based on this time frame, his parents expected him to be arriving at their house around 3 p.m. But 3 o'clock came and went, and Bryce didn't arrive. Karen started to get really worried at this point, and she started calling his phone around 3:30 to see if perhaps he was just stuck in traffic. Who knows? But Bryce wasn't answering his phone. Karen kept calling and calling for hours, leaving voicemails repeatedly and becoming further concerned for her son. Bryce had not arrived at their home in any time frame they expected. In fact, he hadn't answered their phone calls at all, which means it had been about 6 hours now since anyone had last talked to Bryce.
So at this point, Karen and Mike decided to file a missing persons report with the Orange County Sheriff Department. Police were able to ping Bryce's phone with the help of their phone provider, and what they find is quite shocking, to say the least. Bryce, he was still in Button Willow and only moved 8 miles down the road from where his car originally ran out of gas, which was 9 hours ago.
What the heck?
That just, blows my mind. He must have got in the car to say, I'm gonna start driving a little bit, stopped only 8 miles away, and then just parked it again.
Yeah. It's truly the strangest thing. Makes no sense.
And that's not even the strangest part about this case, which...
Get ready.
Kern County Sheriff deputies drive up to the location and find Bryce still sitting there in his parked car near the highway, not too far from the rest area that he was just at. They checked on him, performed a sobriety test, and with Bryce's consent, even searched the car. They didn't find any drugs, and there was no evidence of drinking. From his outside appearance, he seemed fine, unharmed, and alert. And when they asked him, "Hey, what are you doing here?" he simply replied, quote unquote, "just blowing off steam." At this point, the police wanted Bryce to call his parents, but for some unknown reason, he was pretty hesitant. And instead, they just decided to dial the phone for him anyway, and he then spoke to his parents. So at this point, Karen was now just concerned that Bryce hadn't eaten or probably slept in some time, and was going to be back on the road driving in the dark. So Karen asked the police before she hung up if they thought he would be competent enough to be driving now. And they agreed that he seemed totally fine, and with that, they just left him continue his journey. Christian, the man at the repair shop, happened to be returning a call from Karen earlier in the day, and he actually offered to go and check on Bryce again, but Karen said not to worry about it. He should have been on his way by now. But nonetheless, Christian, who's pretty awesome person for doing this, went anyway, and about 15 minutes later, he called Karen back because Bryce was still there.
What? I don't understand why he's still sitting there and why nobody at this point has gone to check on him besides Christian and the police who let him continue sitting there.
Yeah, what must have been going on in his head at this point to be at this location for so long? What were you thinking?
It's such a random location, too.
Button Willow.
It's not a known location to him.
No.
It's random.
Yeah. So now, oddly, Bryce had been sitting in the car near the highway, or at the very least in the town of Button Willow, for 13 hours.
Incredibly long time.
Yeah. What? So Christian, being the kind person that he was, he wanted to make sure that Bryce was actually going to get going because he had been there for 13 hours, so kind of need to get going, Bryce.
Mm-hmm.
So Christian followed him onto the highway, making sure he was heading onto I-5 South, and within 30 minutes, Bryce was on the highway. Christian only followed him for about 10 miles, and then Bryce was again back on his own. So at this point, Karen was talking to him a little bit and told Bryce that he needed to stay in contact and he needed to be answering her calls. This worked great for a few hours. Bryce was answering their calls and they wanted a way to know exactly where he was, so they started asking him about landmarks and street signs, but he tried to avoid it by saying he couldn't see any, and there weren't any lights. But he did tell him that the GPS location said that he would be there about 3:25 a.m.
So it is now 2:09 in the morning on Friday, August 30th. And Bryce called his mom to say that he was too tired to keep driving and that he was going to pull off of the highway into a rest area and sleep in his car. They didn't argue with him because he's been attempting this trip now for the past 24 to 27-ish hours, a long time. Later that morning, at 8 a.m., the doorbell rings at the Laspisa's home. When they opened the door, they expected to see their son. Sadly, it was a California Highway Patrol officer. He asked them if they owned a 2003 Toyota Highlander. The officer informed them that during their training at 5:30 that morning, it was located abandoned at Castaic Lake on an access road to the lake's recreation area, which is only about 2 hours north from their home. So Bryce had made some progress, but not enough. And that only the car was found. Bryce was not with the car. Bryce's car was found at the bottom of a 25-foot ravine and on its side. The back window appeared to be punched out from the inside, which is how they think Bryce exited the car, and a small amount of blood was found on the passenger side headrest and back seat. But not enough to assume that he had been seriously injured, unless he experienced internal injury. Also found inside the car were Bryce's belongings, his laptop and his phone, and just outside of the car were his duffel bag and his wallet. Based on tire tracks, it appeared as though at some point during the early morning, Bryce drove down the access road towards the cell tower, and then alongside it, and then down a very steep hill. And it appeared as though he was actually accelerating down the hill, and that he didn't use his brakes at all, and then went front first right off the embankment, and then the car fell onto its side.
So after looking at the immediate crime scene of finding the car off the embankment and on its side, they wanted to try and find a little bit more information of what was going on. Maybe anybody saw something or whatever it may be. And they did actually find that there were some cameras that took images of a specific road that Bryce had traveled on. So they went there and they found some imaging. There are CCTV images of Lake Hughes Road of Bryce's car, and it takes a photo of the back license plate traveling up the road. The first picture was taken at 2:15 a.m., just 6 minutes after he had last spoken to his mom, telling her that he was pulling over to rest. This is where things start to get a little weird, because the next photo of his same car, back license plate, was taken at 4:29, and it shows that Bryce was traveling in the same direction, up the road again. And these two images were the last images of Bryce's car before it was found crashed. I don't understand what he was doing at this time.
I have no idea. I also don't understand how he went up the hill, or he went up the road, and then we never saw him come back down the road, but then he went back up the hill again. And I'm like, how did you do that? I'm assuming that it would have just at least caught him going up or down in either direction.
Yeah.
Because if it caught his back license plate, it would catch his front license plate going down.
True.
And maybe the road continues all the way through, but we never found anything about that. There was any documentation saying that there's a loop in the road. It just is really odd how he got there again.
And I also don't get it because, what could you have been doing? It's not like you had somebody to meet. It's not like you had to go pick something up at a grocery store. Your intent was to go and sleep.
In theory.
Yeah. I don't know.
I
have no freaking idea.
Who
Bryce,
knows?
You got all sorts of questions for us, man.
Yeah.
Honestly, this part it makes it seem, and we'll talk about the theories a little bit later, but it makes it seem pretty intentional and possibly that he was suicidal. Perhaps he meant to go down this large hill. I mean, it makes sense because he is accelerating down the large hill, and then right into the water, but that didn't happen. From the top of the hill near the cell tower, it did appear that the water was close, but it was actually a good distance away.
Karen and Mike don't believe that he was having a substance abuse problem or that he was drinking more excessively than any other teenager in college experimenting. They had just spent the whole summer with him and they didn't see anything that they thought was abnormal behavior, anything that concerned them. And they didn't think that the drugs or drinking, which they did know he was drinking, and experimenting a little, but they didn't think that had anything to do with his disappearance. Since the police at this point are going with the theory that he wanted to commit suicide, they started a large-scale search. They had hundreds of volunteers searching the surrounding land by foot, by ATV, with search dogs, with cadaver dogs, with helicopters, by boat, and even divers were searching the lake.
There's massive. A lot going on.
It's so intense, and which is awesome, really, but
yeah.
Mike was making flyers to distribute, missing person flyers, and Karen was in contact with the media. But over the next couple of days, no evidence of Bryce, alive or dead, was found. And with no eyewitness of the crash, there were no leads to go off of. 5 days later, on September 4th, a jogger called 911 to report a brush fire. When the first responders arrived, they found a body burning, and it was only 3 miles away from Bryce's car was located, so initially it was thought that it could possibly be Bryce, but upon further DNA testing, it was found to be a man victim of homicide out of LA. So unfortunately, Bryce is still missing. And by this point, after all of the searching, the police believed that if Bryce had committed suicide in the park or in the lake, he would have been found by now. So now they start to believe that he chose to walk away from the crash and possibly his life, maybe just to start a new life.
People now wonder if he ever even intended on making it back home. Was this his plan all along? What did he want to talk to his mom about? There are still so many questions that are left unanswered about this case. His parents have stated that they don't think the news that he wanted to tell them has anything to do with his disappearance. Overall, the entire active search lasted about 3 weeks and ended with no success. Months began to pass with no leads popping up, and at this point, Karen and Mike decided to hire a private investigator to try and discover more answers. In August of 2014, private investigator Denise Savastano, who specializes in missing person cases, was hired, but she chose to work pro bono.
Which is quite amazing. That's very kind of her. And then also, she must think that this case is big enough and important enough to work pro bono. That's amazing of her.
Which means free.
Yes.
So after finding some information, her theory was that Bryce did indeed try making it back to his parents' house in Laguna Niguel, because his GPS coordinates reflected as so. She speculates that Bryce possibly experienced a head injury after crashing, which left him disoriented and perhaps suffered a psychotic break following his drug use, which could explain his unusual behavior. In the days before the accident, he did have increasingly more reckless behavior. Both Sean and his girlfriend Kim were concerned with the amount he was drinking and the way that he was acting while taking Vyvanse. Also, giving away important possessions such as his Xbox and his earrings. Perhaps he was having a psychotic break, or suicidal ideations. It would kind of help to explain his odd behavior a little bit more.
So there are 3 main theories that still remain today. The first one is suicide. Many people believe that his odd behavior, such as giving away his valuable items and his heavier drinking, and also the car wreck, just point towards intention, that he may have wanted to go out and actually drive his car into the lake or something. But this is a theory that the family and some investigators don't believe to be true. The second one is that he walked away. A lot of people believe that Bryce didn't want to be found, but that he is very much still alive. With no body ever being found, this supports this theory. But even this, his family doesn't believe, and it's something that they don't think he would ever do. And the third one, the Laspisas and their private investigator, Denise Savastano, believe that Bryce may have suffered a head injury during the crash, and believe that it's possible that he has amnesia and that he may not know who he is, which would also explain why he has never attempted to contact any of them. So I think that he actually might have tried to commit suicide, or that was his intention, and that he he did actually drive up to the top of the hill and then drive down the hill with speed with intention. Like, I just think
seems like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I mean, we know that he didn't die in the car, right? So I don't think that the suicide attempt, if that's what it was, worked. But I do think that if it didn't work, that perhaps he then did maybe get amnesia, or maybe he did suffer some sort of injury and walk away. But if he walked away, he walked far because they searched all of the surrounding areas. So that's why I'm thinking he did actually suffer some head injury and walk away. Maybe he hitchhiked. Maybe he got into a car. He doesn't know his name. He doesn't know who he is. Like, who knows? But nothing to me points to the fact that he is still in the area.
So my theory is definitely with the suicidal theory. Like, everything leading up to it. All of the odd behavior. The drinking, yes. The giving away possessions, that's huge.
Right.
Randomly breaking up with your girlfriend. And then just, like, the weird, like, being in the car for hours and hours to then be called to come back home, to then be in the car for another hour, only move 8 miles, like...
Super weird. It's so weird.
Yeah, like, I just keep thinking, like, what were your thoughts? Like, what were you thinking at that time? Were you trying to plan something? No. I don't know. And then the going up the hill at 2, to then go back down, to then go back up at 4, like, were you trying to figure out your locations? Were you trying to, like, piece, like, how is the hill laid out? Like, were you just trying to...
Yeah, what were you doing?
Yeah, what were you... And to me, it's still just suicide. Like, that just seems point blank. Like, it's the easiest thing to explain. But the thing that's not easy to explain is if he died by suicide, where is his body? Like, where...
Well, right, it should have been located.
Yeah, because he can't move his body after he died.
Right.
Like, that just...
It would be in the lake, or it'd be in the grounds around.
It would be somewhere.
But, on a side note to that, it's interesting how the drug he was taking, Vyvanse, does have similar effects that methamphetamines have.
So that's my other thought. Like, was he also just, like, on high, crazy doses of drugs? Like, he was just, like, crazy stoned out of his mind?
Right.
But the other thing is then police saw him, everybody saw him, they can detect, like, no, something's wrong with this guy, and they let him go. Like,
that's true. I mean, they performed the sobriety test, and he passed.
You can tell if somebody's, like, doped up on drugs.
Right. Too. And they generally do a very good job of figuring that out pretty quickly. So I don't know. It's all just something that is points on top of points on top of points that just don't add up.
Yeah. And the other thing, going back to the third theory, going back to, like, Denise's points about that she believes that he had the intent to go home, specifically because of GPS coordinates, like, that doesn't really make sense to me because it's not a hard fact. Because there are some times that I'm like, hey, I need to get in this general area, so I'm going to plug in my home GPS coordinates to get me in this area so I'm familiar with it, and then I'll take my lead from there and I'll turn off my coordinates.
Right.
So just because his coordinates were on doesn't mean that he had the intent to go home, at least in my opinion.
Now, it is a little different, though, because technically, I don't think he really knew where he was going. Like, his family had just moved to Laguna Niguel, and then he moved to Chico, so he probably would have needed the GPS to get him to Laguna Niguel.
True.
If it was in Illinois, 100%, I think he would have known where he was at.
That's a good point. I don't know. It's just all so strange.
Yeah.
Like, just where... Like, I guess it kind of makes sense that then he walked away because you can't find the body, but where would he walk to? Why would... It just blows my mind. Crazy. Where are you, Bryce Laspisa?
So, honestly, all of that, that's all we have today. Those are the theories we have.
Questions. That's all we have.
Questions and theories. There are no real answers. There's nothing to go off of. But the family does continue to search the area that his car was found. They're very active. In 2015, they even hired a private company to use sonar to search the lake. And sonar uses sound waves that bounce back images. And they were searching the deep waters, which is in an area called Government's Cove. It's about 300 feet deep there. So even after they had used the sonar in that area for 2 12-hour days, so 24 hours total of searching, no new evidence was found. Bryce's license, his social security number, his fingerprints, and his passport are all uploaded into the nationwide missing persons database with the hopes that if for some reason he's ever arrested or located, there will be some information to go off of.
And that's where we stand today. We don't have much information. It's kind of just a waiting game. One thing that we found interesting was Karen, his mom, actually reports that not knowing where Bryce's body is or whereabouts are is actually worse than not knowing if he is dead. So even without the answers, his family is still trying to make an active effort to keep his memory alive. You can go on Facebook and find a page titled Find Bryce Laspisa, and it attempts to publish any new leads that are there. We went on the other day, and it was pretty informative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are actually billboards of, like, Bryce's face and his tattoos,
Mm-hmm.
just to try and have some sort of something that, like,
Yeah, and
him.
I think that we'll actually upload his missing persons flyer onto our Instagram.
Yeah.
So you guys can see him and, hey,
Kind of get a feel for, like, just seeing that this isn't actually just a story. It's a real person. Like,
yes, like, it's still
this
active.
is still happening to his family, and this only happened in
2013.
Yeah, like, that's such a recent case. Like, my heart goes out to them
Yeah.
because that's just such a tough thing to go through.
All right, so how is this wine going for you right now? Or this champagne? I don't know what we're calling it.
Yeah, sparkling wine.
The sparkling wine.
Champagne.
Sure, yes, that's the one.
Let me fill your glass.
Oh, glug, glug, glug.
Glug, 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 glug.
Ooh, look at us go. That bottle is gone.
Yikes.
Apparently, we do like it. It's an indicator because the red wine, although we did like it, we didn't finish the bottle.
No, I finished it like 2 days later.
Yeah.
It was good, but I mean, this is just going down. I'm like, ooh, water? Yeah.
Yes, sign me up.
No, I really like it. It's not like your typical champagne. I mean, you bring in that rosé aspect, and it's sweeter.
I don't buy champagne. I only have champagne at weddings. And let's be real, nobody buys a good champagne to toast at your wedding because that'd be expensive.
I mean, this one's pretty good.
Yes.
And for only $9, maybe we'll go this route for weddings.
Perfect. And I like the bottle. Wait, so here's the thing. So I bought this because the label actually has baby pink glitter, and that just caught my eye. Anything sparkly pink, I'm buying it. So it won me over right away. And I don't ever buy champagne, so this is not something I even knew if it was going to be good or not. But I think we did all right.
The only downfall I think I would say for this wine, heck a bubbles, heck a burping.
Heck a burping.
Otherwise, all of the flavors are amazing.
Yeah.
If you're not about to talk and for extended periods of time, you're going to be fine.
If you just want a good bottle of champagne, it's actually, it says Baraska Cava Brut Rosé, but I don't know literally what any of that means or if I'm saying it right. So
we're just going with the flow.
Yeah.
Delicious. Absolutely
delightful.
Delicious. So we do want to give you just a little bit of information if, hey, maybe you do know something about this case that could be helpful to help their family.
Yeah. So Bryce Laspisa actually went missing in the area of Castaic, California on August 30th, 2013. He was 19 years old at the time, and he was last seen wearing white cargo shorts, a blue and white checkered shirt, and size 12 red and white Nike shoes. He was 5'11" and weighed approximately 170 pounds, and he has red hair and green eyes. He has a tattoo on his upper left arm of a Taurus bull, and his birthday also on his arm in Roman numerals, and his ears were pierced. If alive today, he would be 25 years old. If you have any information regarding the case, you can contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office at 323-890-5500. Tips can also be submitted through email at findbrycelaspisa@gmail.com.
So that's spelled find, F-I-N-D, Bryce, B-R-Y-C-E, Laspisa, L-A-S-P-I-S-A, @gmail.com.
And if you would rather, anonymous tips can be submitted through Crime Stoppers at 800-222-TIPS or lacrimestoppers.org.
Thank you so much for listening this week. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Children Killed Podcast or send us an email at childrenkilledpodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll be back next Tuesday to talk about Skylar Neese.
So stay tuned.
Bye!
Bye.